Good afternoon to all of you, Eccar colleagues, distinguished speakers. Thank you for choosing to participate at Communication. Notwithstanding the difficult and uncertain times, it's important to be here to mark the even greater need to tackle racism and discriminations. My name is Lucia Fresa, and it's a pleasure for me to greet you at the opening of the 2020 Eccar General Conference, which is hosted, regrettably, online by the city of Bologna, city where I'm in charge of the New Citizenships, Cooperation and Human Rights Office and Intercultural Center Massimo Zonarelli. I hope you'll enjoy the contributions and the discussions during this day and a half, where I'm sure we'll learn from each other innovative practices to make city policies against racism and discriminations more effective and impactful in the short, medium, and long term. Before giving the floor to our Deputy Mayor, Marco Lombardo, to welcome you on behalf of our Mayor, I would like to quickly share the rules for today's plenary. So today, no question and answer sessions are foreseen. However, participants may interact, as you are already doing in the chat rooms on the right of your screen, by using the group or private options. As you know, tomorrow during the working groups, there will be more ways for interaction. You can select the language at the bottom of your screen, and if you have a technical issue, please write in the chat, in the private chat, to technical assistance, because there is a team there that is available to help you. So, Marco Lombardo is Deputy Mayor in Bologna, in charge of accessibility, European and international relations, development cooperation, civil society, employment, and immigration policies. Mr. Lombardo, a sincere thank you for taking the time to be here today, notwithstanding the challenges I'm sure you're facing at the moment. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Lucia. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure and an honor for me to welcome you all in this General Conference of Eccar. First of all, I'd like to apologize our Mayor, Virginio Merola, who unfortunately cannot take part to this international conference for unpredictable personal engagement. He asked me to give you all a warm welcome on his behalf and on the behalf of our city of Bologna and our community. This is the 9th General Conference of Eccar. We had to do it in presence, but unfortunately, due to the pandemic COVID-19, we are forced to do it maintaining the physical distancing, and so that's the reason why we are doing it online. The municipality of Bologna has been choosing during the General Conference Assembly of Eccar of June 2019 to welcome and organize this General Conference. The title of this General Conference is Communication, Together for the Protection of Human Rights at local level, which is not only an occasion to discuss of racism and anti-discrimination, but also to take concrete action in a multi-governance and multi-level perspective in order to fight against discrimination and racism. I would like to thank all the organizers, the European Coalition of Eccar in the UNESCO network, the European Commission, the European Court of Justice, the Fundamental Rights Agency, the Italian Agency for Cooperation and Development, the region Emilia-Romagna, all the municipalities involved, as well as the organized and the honorable speaker. The great participation of this General Conference, in which they will take part a lot of local administrations at national, European, and international level, and the widest participation of people inscribed, half from Italy and half from all over the world. We had more than 70 countries, 45 municipalities, not only from European countries, and let me allow to give a welcome also to our sister city of Portland in United States. We have 10 universities and 40 subjects from the social society, which are a comparison to the 20 best practice that will be discussed in the working group. Just the last remarks in this welcoming speech. at the entrance of our municipal building, from today, there is the picture of Ebru Tiktik, the lawyer that has paid with his wife the struggle for the protection of human rights. We devote this opening speech to his memory and to the memories of all the people died in the protection of fundamental rights. There is a rich and intense program. I will get into the detail on the speech in the panel of the afternoon and in the panel of tomorrow morning. But I would like also to stress the fact that the pandemic situation is increasing inequalities and the risk of old and new discriminations. So I'm sure that the awareness of the participants and all the institutions involved in this program will provide ideas, actions, and suggestions to tackle these inequalities and this discrimination, because only together we can sort out as a human race from this extraordinary period of difficulties. Thank you very much and have a good work.
Thank you, Mr. Lombardo. I will now give the floor first to Ms. Gabriela Ramos. Ms. Gabriela Ramos is Assistant Director General for Social and Human Sciences at UNESCO. Let me just add here that UNESCO is the UN organization that launched the Eccar in 2004 to establish a network of cities interested in sharing experiences in order to improve their policies to fight racism, discrimination, and xenophobia. So, Ms. Ramos, thank you for your participation today. Please take the floor.
Thank you so much, Lucia, and thank you to Mr. Lombardo and to Benedetto Sacchioli, who I met just recently. And thank you for allowing us to be here with the distinguished representatives of European citizens and with all of you who are joining us today. And it's my real privilege to welcome you to the 2020 General Conference of the European Coalition of Cities Against Racism. I'm honored to represent UNESCO, as is what mentioned. We were at the incept of this coalition, but more than past history, I think it's a great network that will probably deliver very good lessons for the situation we are facing now. And I'm honored to be with you. I was equally pleased to recently meet with the president of Eccar, and I look forward to establishing a strong cooperation with him and his coalition. And since my arrival in UNESCO just last July, I was really looking forward to meet you. Nobody would have told us that we were going to meet again in a virtual format. And nobody would have told us that the situation will continue with this high level of uncertainty because of the pandemic. What we know for sure is that cities have a very important role to play, and you are playing it, not only with the original mandate to protect human rights and human dignity, but also to put upfront the measures and the decisions that are needed to be taken at the local level to weigh the pandemic. As Marco mentioned, the pandemic is just making our traditional challenges of inequalities, or traditional challenges of discrimination, and our traditional challenges of this very asymmetric impact much more important. And I think that it is for us to lift up the efforts and continue to deliver for people. And of course, we see global reports of the COVID impact. We see economic impact. We see social impact, health impact. We see the catastrophe that it has created in communities and families and people. But as I said, those that are at the front line are the cities. And I want to commend your efforts. And I hope that we will be able to overcome this very difficult time together with its immense human, social, and economic cost. And I also want to commend your efforts, the efforts of Inclusive Cities, which has prioritized anti-discrimination and anti-racist actions, which are also seeing some increase against vulnerable groups, and efficiently dealt with homelessness, migrants, celebration, despair, and shelters for battered women. We all hear that in this context it's very important to protect the most vulnerable, but it's the cities that are really in charge of delivering it for good. So keep up this good work. And in the context of increased discrimination, UNESCO is also being called by its members to upgrade its action in this domain. We were actually pleased to see that the European Union is also delivering for this, and that President van der Leyen in her State of the Union make a very strong call to update the strategy against racism, and also call for the countries in Europe to adopt national plans against discrimination and racism, which at the current moment we only have 15 countries out of 27 members, and we hope that this will be increased. So I'm really looking forward to work together with Eccar, with the EU, and also to see how this additional call by UNESCO members to upgrade our work could be delivered together. According to the European Agency for Fundamental Rights, the issue of racism and discrimination across Europe is extreme in magnitude and scope. And I think that we need to bring the evidence to see that our efforts are important, but we need to continue redoubling to deliver. The proliferation of racist actions against people of African descent has reached as high as 14% annually across the European Union. The agency also reported that discrimination related to anti-Gypsyism has seen a 50% increase in the educational segregation of Roma children as recorded between 2015 to 2020. And regarding anti-Semitism, 39 of those surveyed have experienced some form of harassment, and the same with discrimination against people of Arab origin. But not only that, even in Europe, violence against women is rapidly increasing. And I think this is one of the features that is more harmful from the whole pandemic situation, because even in very advanced economies of Europe, we are seeing a 30% in the increase of violence due to the lockdown. And this highlights that the biases and the problems that we had before the pandemic are just magnified, are just really put up front for us to address them. So there is an urgent need to strengthen existing measures, including the creation of more shelters and integrated centers, as well as improvement in the training and preparation of police forces and social workers. With your help, I would propose to organize a landmark event in 2021 that features the work of majors to eliminate violence against women and girls, because again, you are at the core of this effort. We need to recognize the problem, but we also need to energize ourselves with the best practices from the continent. The pandemic also came with disproportionate economic and social impacts, very asymmetric. And according to the ILO, people living under the minimum wage in some European countries reported that 70% have lost a job, contrary to the top income earners that the incidence on losing a job was even lower, but they were increasing their earnings. And the asymmetry is just going to be a problem that we will need to address and mapping out these impacts. The European Network Against Racism showed that although there is an overrepresentation of more than 30% of immigrants in COVID-related incidents, the barriers to access to healthcare and basic services are multiplying. While the pandemic has devastated the world, it has also presented us with the opportunity to address these social ills that the crisis has unveiled. At the social and human science sector I'm overseeing at UNESCO, we are strengthening our work to deliver for inclusive societies and to mend these problems. Since the creation, you know that UNESCO promotes the values of diversity, tolerance, and dialogue, and fighting social and economic inequalities. But we're also dealing with the digital world. And I wanted to share with you that we are elaborating the first global standard on ethics of artificial intelligence, because I feel that what we have in the analog world as racism and discrimination should not just be translated in the digital world, and we will need your support. We are also core at promoting gender diversity, including in AI, but also promoting legal equality and benchmarks. We also have targeted initiatives to empowerment through sport quality, through education, and to many other activities that we will be commenting with you in these areas. But more than anything, we are very encouraged that by now there are around 40 countries on UNESCO who are calling us to upgrade our action on anti-discrimination and anti-racism. And we will count on you because we want to look at the legal frameworks, we want to look at the incentives, we want to look at the institutions. How do we protect even the institutions from this issue? We have our masterclass on anti-biases, and then, of course, affirmative action. We need to be true when we speak about countering these. And I'm so glad that some of you joined the UNESCO's webinar on inclusion in the times of COVID, because we were underlying these issues. And we also work with you with some regional expert consultations that will really deliver for the roadmap that we are called to produce. And I will be happy to do it with Eccar. I could not go without commending the efforts of Eccar through the city of Graz in Austria, who partnered with UNESCO and the Arab Coalition of Cities to develop a toolkit for urban inclusion. This is the kind of things that we can go do together, and we will be happy to broker this with other cities. And then, as you mentioned, great to have Portland today, but we also need to reach out with other international coalitions. Like just recently, we had the World Human Rights Cities Forum hosted by the South Korean city of Gwangju, and welcomed to 3,000 participants from 253 cities representing 76 countries, and they deliver very strong action plans. Recommitting with the Sustainable Development Goals and the Habitat 3 urban agenda. And of course, the city of Gwangju offer an excellent opportunity of partnership with Eccar. But more than anything, we're here to learn from you, we're here to work with you, and we're here to renew our commitment to continue delivering for a more inclusive growth. And we're so glad to have this network working closely with UNESCO. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ramos, for giving us already a deep insight into data and contents. Tomorrow there will be also Commissioner Dalli from the European Union, and she will indeed touch upon some of the subjects you've mentioned, as well as the director of the Fundamental Rights Agency. Also, you mentioned some data from that agency as well. So we will have ways to discuss this further. So now I'm very happy to introduce Ellie Schlein, Vice President of the Emilia-Romagna region. Ellie is in charge of the fight against inequalities and ecological transition, Pact for the Climate, welfare, housing policies, youth policies, international development cooperation, international relations, and relations with the EU. And I think I've said it all. And Ellie Schlein, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot. Can you hear me well? Good. So thanks a lot for the invitation. It's a real pleasure to be here with you this afternoon for the General Conference of Eccar 2020. I want to thank Comune di Bologna. Obviously, I can see Assessore Lombardo is present. Ciao Marco. I want to thank obviously the European Coalition of Cities Against Racism, but also the International Coalition of Inclusive and Sustainable Cities, Eccar, and Comune di Bologna Centro Interculturale Zonarelli, with which I had the occasion in the past also to work. So I can say, as Regione Emilia-Romagna, we can't be happier that Comune di Bologna is hosting this very important conference for this year. And to support the organization of this conference. I think it's coming in a very crucial moment, because probably it's what Marco already said. This pandemic, this crisis, gives us the opportunity also to see new and unprecedented challenges that we have to face together. I was listening carefully to Ms. Ramos, that I thank very much for her words. We have to do a lot together, but we can only win this kind of fights if we work closely and we strengthen our cooperation at all institutional levels. It's encouraging to see so many cities participating in Eccar and trying to get involved and trying to put in place policies that look into how we can actually and effectively contrast racism, anti-Semitism, but also misogyny and sexism, and also homophobia, biphobia, and transphobia. For example, in this region, last year, we managed to pass a regional law against homophobia, biphobia, and transphobia. And luckily, also in the law chamber of Italy, very recently, in the last weeks, there was a new law that passed. It still has to wait for the second approval in the Senate, but still it's good news. We're moving ahead. We are conscious that today, in terms of human rights, we have possibly more difficulties, even more. Why? Because this pandemic is obviously increasing inequalities, social inequalities, but also economic, gender inequalities. We know that. But apart from that, it's also creating new needs. And I think that the responsibility of those of us who are in government are not to, in a way, increase social tension, but trying to work at the root causes of these tension and this hatred that is spreading in our societies. And if we want to work on the root causes, well, there is a lot we have to do to fight inequalities. It means that if we find ways with our institutions to work with progressive measures that give the right answers to the needs and the different needs that our communities express, then there's the best way and the best antidote to this hatred. That's what we're trying to do, even in these difficult times challenging the pandemic in Emilia-Romagna. We work very closely with Comune di Bologna and many other municipalities in this direction. So just to conclude and to thank you and praise you for your efforts, I would like to say, what are common lines that we can try to further work on? Inclusive languages in our institutions, building strong networks with civil society organization, but also organization of enterprises and trade unions, which are also crucial actors in these fields. At the same time, I am very convinced that we need to boost our efforts in terms of education to differences, starting from the schools. We know that schools are the place where we can work on differences before they become inequalities. And so the more we can invest in this direction in schools, the more we will be effective and successful in fighting hatred, and also that part of politicians that are trying to boost that kind of hatred, putting people against other people, usually across the most vulnerable people. So this is one way we have to work on, but also not only in schools, also in the public administration. And that's an effort that we have all to do within our institution and through our institutions. So these are just a couple of ideas, and I will end with this. There is a lot we can do, and there is a lot that we can do to see people and recognize their differences, and to grant equal access to our services. I think that we have a difficult future ahead, but the Agenda of 2030 gives us the right framework. It's about keeping together the social and the environmental dimension. It's about seeing the inseparable connection between inequalities and climate. We can see it in our territory, in Italy, also in the Regione Emilia-Romagna. We can see it even more if we are to look ahead and to see how developing countries are paying the higher price of this climate change, even if they're less responsible of those changes. So, in a way, the Agenda 2030, in its universality and also in the interconnection of the goals gives us a right framework to work together at all institutional level, and we're trying as Emilia Romagna to improve our efforts. I'm happy to announce that we are this year deciding to increase by 50% our support and resources for the network against discrimination in Regione Emilia Romagna, and we want to work together with all the knots of this very precious network that we are developing at the regional level. So if all of us can do their part, I think we can be successful. Have a good day and thanks for your efforts, for real.
Thank you very much. I think you couldn't give a better news about the regional anti-discrimination network. Thank you very much. We are looking forward to strengthening the cooperation with the Emilia-Romagna region as City of Bologna, and I hope also as Eccar. So thank you, really. And now I'm very glad to leave the floor to Benedetto Zacchiroli, Eccar President. As he is really at home, both in Eccar, which he followed from the very beginning when he was a municipal councillor in Bologna back in 2005. And he is also at home here in Bologna. Of course, I would like to ask Benedetto to take the floor and then afterwards to guide us to the following dialogue. Thank you, Benedetto.
I'll do with pleasure. So thank you very much to give me the floor. And I wish to embrace, if I can, Ellie and Gabriela and Marco and Lucia. Thanks for your effort and your work and all the people that are connected in this moment. If I may, I will skip in Italian language just because you know, the official languages of Eccar meetings are every time or German or English or French. So for the first time, I can speak in Italian, and I'm really happy to do that if I can. So, no, grazie mille a tutti.
Thank you so much to all of you. Well, I will try to speak slowly because we have translation. The very first thing that I'd like to say, well, is that being a citizen of Bologna, I would like to dedicate the next 2 days that we're going to spend together, well, to a situation that for Bologna people is really sad, really terrible, but it keeps us very united. Well, I'm referring to Patrick Zacchi, who's a researcher of the University of Bologna, that is the eldest in the Western world. Since the last 7th of February, he has been kept in prison without any reason, any apparent reason. He's been kept by the Egyptian authorities. Our university, the municipality, the region, but also the European Union are all working together with the citizens, and they are asking that Patrick can come back. So, well, we have a thing like the honorary citizenship, and Patrick received it from the municipality of Bologna last summer. Patrick, like all the students of the University of Bologna, are our citizens, and we're asking for Patrick to come back to Bologna to give his contribution. He's a human rights activist, and well, it looks like the Egyptian authorities are saying that he wrote some political negative things or bad things on his social networks. In Bologna in the year 1254 was free from slavery. It was the very first city in the world, and so this is why we would like to have Patrick back. And I hope that all the European cities that are attending this conference, please, if we could all do something in order to make sure that maybe one day in the future we'll be able to invite him at our conference. Well, as the president of Eccar, this is my third general conference, and it is, well, this is a moment that is very precious for our network. of the cities. We are trying to join all our work, the results of our work together with UNESCO in order to open up the windows of our association. And we're trying to speak out, we're trying to express our mind, express our opinions outwards. And in fact, in December, we will have our General Assembly that will vote, and we will try to make, let's say, sort of a summary. Eccar is a network of cities that was born in order to do things, not just to speak, but also to do things. Our constitution is the 10-point plan of action, 10 points. We are cities that are together in order to think, propose, but also implement policies against racism and against discrimination. So I'd like to also to express my gratitude towards UNESCO, first of all. Thank you, Gabriella. And well, we managed to meet, well, it was last minute meeting in September, just after the summer, when it was possible to meet in presence, but now it's not anymore. Anyhow, I'd like to thank the European Commission, that is also part of our adventure. And well, on the 18th of September 2020, Eurocities and also Eccar was mentioned in the plan of action of the European Union against racism. We have been mentioned as a local instrument of action in order to fight against racism for the plan for the timeframe 2020-2025. So we feel this responsibility, and we intend to keep on working, because we want to work for our continent, we want to work for our citizens and the cities. And also the FRA, that is the European Union Agency for Fundamental Rights. And we will hear from the president of the agency. It is very important to know the data. Without data, we go nowhere. So we need to collect numbers in order to make decisions, in order to define very efficient policies, and also in order to have a feedback related to those policies. Policies obviously cannot be made randomly. And then we will have the director of UNER, the Italian National Office Against Racism in Italy, because we want to work with all the equality bodies that exist in Europe and in every country. Eccar is a big hinge, let's say, between the bottom-up approach, but also, well, from top down, in order to make sure that our policies start from the civil society. And we want to work with the civil society. We'll see that the civil society is collaborating with the cities. Well, we want to know what happens in the cities. We want to know exactly what things happen in the cities, because I often say that the prime ministers, heads of state can make decisions, for example, about the issue of immigration, how many migrants we can well, have in our countries. But well, then we will see them, we will meet them in our cities at the end of the day. So we want to welcome them with dignity, guaranteeing dignity to all of them. So why that? And now I'm going to conclude, because as I said, we are a network that does practical things. And let's now, since we are practical people, let's now switch to the first topic, the first part of the agenda. Actually, I didn't know that I had to be the chairman. Lucia hadn't told me. And so why, Lucia, why are you not the chairman, Lucia, or the chairwoman, Lucia, please? Because I don't have the agenda with me. I'm sorry. So thank you again. Of course. So
that probably Karen Taylor has not arrived yet. So I would just like to ask if they confirm this. Okay, she has arrived. Okay, so I just need to give the floor to Giuseppina Marcante, whom I really thank also to have accepted our invitation to moderate the dialogue that will start and will throw us deep into the discussion on our themes. So, Giusy, the floor is yours. Go ahead. Thank you.
Buon pomeriggio a tutti, ringrazio.
Afternoon to all of you. Thank you, Marco Lombardo, Lucia Fresa, and Eccar for your trust. Thank you for giving me the responsibility. It's a big honor for me to be the chairman or chairwoman for this dialogue and also the roundtable that we will listen afterwards. Well, first of all, I'd like to express my greetings to our guests. We have highly distinguished guests and we will hear from them about our actions, about what Eccar is doing. Eccar is very practical and does very practical things. Well, first of all, I'd like to express my greetings to Karen, Taylor and Majid that will participate in the dialogue in the first part of our meeting. So now I'm going to ask the very first question to them because we wanted to go to get to the core of the matter. So I would like to start from this question. During these years, within the political, within the European debate, very often well, people talked about eliminating the word race from constitutions. That happened in France in 2018. It may happen in Germany also, because a political agreement has been reached. Also, we talked about it in Italy, but without reaching any conclusions. Well, there was actually anthropology asked for it in Italy. I'd like to ask our guests about this topic. Do you think that this has led us to an improvement in the political action, in the public debate? And I'd like to start from Karen Taylor. Good afternoon, first of all. Thank you for being with us.
For having me. It's a great honor to speak at the Eccar conference. Even though it's a digital conference, I believe it's really crucial that we're having this moment and also addressing this question of racism and linking it directly to the city. So with regards to your question, I personally believe that it's bringing us that it's taking us backwards. We have had the discussions about race in Germany. We have had them on the European level. And with introducing this question of erasing race or replacing it with different concepts, we risk a protection gap, a legal protection gap. But I must also say that especially when we look at Germany, there is, of course, a history around the term. There is a reluctance to use that term. And even worse, there have been studies showing that people who can actually use the term in order to get protection, in order to get legal protection, they refrain from using that term because they don't see themselves as a kind of race. So it's not only coming, and here I think we have to do these, look at these both sides. It's not only coming from the legal experts or from the white majority that has a kind of bad feeling using the term race with regards to the German history, but it's also the people who are affected by racism that don't believe that the concept is belongs to them. So I believe what we need is to have a discussion about what racism actually is, what the term race means within this discussion, and that it's absolutely clear that we're not talking about biological human races, but rather about a sociological construction. From the very beginning, it was clear that we are constructing something that doesn't exist and that we are linking prejudices bad behavior, traces, and so on to the term of race. Because what is happening right now, if we are erasing it, we won't have the legal base, I believe, to attack racism legally in German courts. So it's crucial to keep this term. But I want to state here that different social organizations here in Germany, Black organizations, as well as Sinti and Roma organizations, they have their doubts about this term.
Grazie Karen.
Karen, thank you for your answer, very comprehensive answer. Thank you so much. I'd like to ask the same question to Majid. I'm really interested in hearing his listening to his answer, also considering your biography. You were also a mayor, among the many other things you've done during your very young life. So thank you, by the way, thank you for being with us. Thank you.
Wish I couldn't understand Italian. It's one of the languages I'll hopefully pick up in the future. But honestly, it gives me a really great pleasure to be taking part in this conference. It's a shame that we couldn't do it in person. I actually had the privilege of visiting Bologna and Emilia Romagna, the entire region, and in January, in fact, and I actually came for 3 days to help campaign for Stefano Bonaccini in the elections, which I was happy to see him elected. But I guess, first of all, just to address the question, and I'm totally agree with all the kind of comments and points made by my friend Karen. But I guess it's when it really kind of comes down to, you can erase the word, you can get rid of the word race, but fundamentally racism still exists, and as a result, sadly, there are people who are dying and suffering because of it. And I know that France actually did it in 2018, but I'd be really interested to know if there has been any studies and any research done and what the impact of just erasing the word race did in terms of like race relations, or whether that be tackling racial inequality and across France. And I know 2018 seems like a lifetime ago with everything that's been happening, but I would not be surprised if like racial equality has massively widened since 2018. And of course, we know that the recent Black Lives Matter protests all across Europe have really exposed our dismal record on race-based violence and discrimination and harassment. So I just feel as if like it's not the solution, you know. Honestly, like it's more than anything else. We already know that Black communities in Europe are subjected to areas that have the most like poor access to education, housing, healthcare, air quality, you name it, basically. And especially, it's mainly young people in Europe who are less likely to have access to opportunities. And as much as I really welcome things like the recent EU upgrade to its race equality law, which of course is important, but erasing the word race from constitution isn't a solution. And I believe if anything, like, it will just give people an excuse not to discuss it, and it will actually put pressure on people not to discuss it. And it'll just kind of make it a non-issue. I know in the UK, we're not close to having that. We've got our race equality laws and everything like that. But the thing is that as much as I welcome legislation, and as much as some people might argue and think that by getting the word race, removing the word race from the constitution is going to help in some sort of way, but it's kind of important to kind of always remember that you can't legislate compassion, you can't legislate empathy between people. And I just cannot fathom and understand how that is going to solve the deep racial inequality that we've got all across Europe. And I just think it's just, we can be putting that energy and time and effort into actual real life solutions, into actually tackling and race inequality across Europe. But I just don't think that in itself is going to do anything, to be honest, apart from cause a hindrance. Because it also kind of makes me think, say for example, in the UK, when we record our hate crimes, and well, we try and record, even though we had a problem with people underreporting hate crimes, and the police and authorities basically just go off the figures and the reports that they get. And at times they will say, look, there's not much people haven't reported it, so it's not that much of an issue. So if we getting rid of the word race, I don't know the implications that will have in terms of when people actually come to reporting race problems, and I just feel like it'll just have massive implications everywhere, and I'm not in favor of it, and I just can't see for the life of me how it actually tackles the bigger problem.
All right, thank you. Well, let's now get to the second question. And well, this is a question more related to action or putting in place activities or actions. Tell me if you agree. Well, sometimes there's a sort of reluctance talking about racism. Sometimes, well, the risk is a sort of a self-censorship in anti-discriminatory policies. So it's not just about producing manifestos or carrying out a communication campaign. It's a matter of putting actions in place. What do you think? Do you have any idea about actions to be taken? Do you have any suggestion for us, since we're trying to do our best to do that? So starting from Karen Taylor.
Actions cities could actually take enforce. So I believe that we have different kind of mechanisms. In the cities, we have local organizations, local civil society organizations that are active and that are in some countries at scrutiny and at risk of dissolution. As the chair of ENA, of the European Network Against Racism, I have to mention the organizations CIF in France. I also have to mention FEMISO, both organizations that are fighting anti-Muslim hatred and Islamophobia, not only in France, but in the whole of Europe. And we've seen that from discussions and of course from terrorist attacks that have happened in the past, that we see that a direct link from organizations that do work on the ground, that do this really important work, and we see that their work has been linked to terrorist attacks and so on and so forth. So this is a direct attack on these kind of work of organizations, and instead of getting solidarity from national governments, from the cities, they have been restrained, their funds have been cut, and so on and so forth. So what I believe cities can do is to actually look at these kind of organizations they have been working closely with in the past and come out publicly saying these are organizations that do the work that we need in our society. These are the organizations that people from special communities turn to first. And these are also the communities that cannot be linked with these kind of attacks and so on and so forth. So there has to be a clear commitment of the local level that is in contact with these kinds of organizations. That would be something which is for me very pressing at the moment, because I see how these organizations are struggling. So that would be one thing. The other thing is cities are also in the capacity to fund organizations. When I look at Germany, we have a very, very diverse structure when it comes to funding of organizations. You have it on a federal, national level. You also have it on a local and even lower municipality level. So these kinds of levels need to be easy to reach for civil society organizations, especially when it comes to anti-racist organizations, where we see that a lot of work is voluntary work, where the people just don't have the capacities to go into this whole funding application process that the European Commission, for example, requires, or even on the national level where you have to have your own co-funding and so on and so forth. I believe cities here can be the direct link and be the direct connection to these kinds of organizations, to these kinds of initiatives. Some of them aren't even organizations yet, where you can support directly. That would be on supporting civil society. I believe it's crucial to have in all these discussions civil society involved and not just let them come in at the time of consultancy and so on, because if we don't involve civil society from the very beginning, we can't make sure that we are actually attacking the issue. And moving on from supporting civil society, I believe it's also crucial that that cities have their own kind of statement, their own kind of commitment to fighting anti-racism. That can be in a, let's call it, city plan against racism. I mean, we have heard about we have heard of the national action plans against racism. Here in Germany, I have to criticize our national action plan because there are neither plans in it nor action. It's more a kind of enumeration of the measures that have been taken place, and it also names the different kind of different kinds of communities that are touched by racism. But I believe there is a lack of actually coming up with a target, saying that is the situation right now, this is where we want to go, and this is what is going to happen if we don't reach this target. This is what is missing, and I believe cities can come in with a very concrete action plan. And here I want to mention the example of Berlin. We are within the decade for people of African descent until 2025, and so far there hasn't been a lot of action around this whole resolution from the UN, and Berlin is a very good example because Berlin has started a consultation process around this whole decade, is in contact with civil society and even beyond the people of African descent here in Berlin, and is now about to finalize a kind of program, a kind of plan, how to address anti-Black racism here in Berlin and which kind of measures needs to be taken place. So this is a very concrete example how one city went about involving a special community and also making sure what this community is demanding also ends up on the administration level.
Ugualmente a Majid, insomma, chiedo una risposta su.
To hear from you. Thank you.
I didn't like. Yeah, I'm gonna go with the question I've received, and so I guess in terms of first and foremost, just coming and touching upon what Karen said, and for me, I feel like first and foremost, there's a lot that cities can do, especially with a lot of devolved power, and so we don't always have to rely on national government to kind of give us permission or anything like that to do. So from I guess from a Yorkshire, from a UK point of view, and more of a region Sheffield perspective, one thing we always try to make sure is that we really ingrained anti-racism in all aspects of our culture all across the city. That also included sporting events. So we've got 2 major football clubs in Sheffield. So we'd always kind of make sure that they, within the sports clubs themselves, had anti-racism strategies for their club, but also for their supporters. And I guess it's all about just trying to create an atmosphere and community of basically that we know racism exists and we're going to tackle it. And I think culture in itself plays a really strong part more than anything else as well. That also kind of was across music events. We used to have like racism against music. So it was a point of trying to make it, in fact, rather than people thinking it's just something that the local council and politicians kind of address, it was something that it's important to, I guess, address all across and aspects of life in a city, I suppose. Even so much even on transport, because we look at where, and from a UK's point of view, a lot of the places where racism actually takes place is on public transports. So one of the things I was pushing for was that to actually have anti-racism training for all frontline staff in transport, whether that be train drivers, bus drivers, just because so then they know how to spot it, what to do, how to report it. And so just kind of taking steps like that more than anything. But I think it's always really important to be proactive rather than reactive, because at times I feel like we're always quite reactive. We always, at times, it can be like when something happens, then we react to it. And I guess by really trying to root out racism, and it's like we always have to make sure that we're really proactive in trying to get ahead of the curve. And one thing that we've been trying to do, I guess, again, from a local point of view, is that, for example, in Sheffield, we've got 20% of the population is from a Black minority ethnic background. So therefore, we've got a campaign and with specific targets to make sure that there is 20% like Black and minority ethnic representation on all executive boards that make decisions that's going to affect everybody in Sheffield, just so basically people feel as if like they are represented on those boards, even though of course like I'm not necessarily a favor of like trickle down identity politics in the sense of just by having Black and brown faces in high places doesn't necessarily solve and the deep issues of race inequality across wherever, but I think it's definitely a good start. But I think, again, just to kind of really emphasize the aspect of education, because again, like this is something I think one of the most important things we can do is really educate ourselves. And that's something, of course, we can roll out within schools, within colleges, because it really tackles the heart of it more than anything else. Because if you're not Black, one of the most important things you can do right now, I guess, is to learn about the situation, about racism, read upon why people have been protesting, to have to understand why, like why is it, more importantly, I guess, is how you yourself can be part of that change, because racism is real at the end of the day, and I guess being non-racist is not enough. We all kind of have to strive to be anti-racist, which basically means actively fighting against racism rather than being passively sympathetic towards it. And one ambitious thing which I would absolutely, it would be revolutionary if it actually was possible and if people had the courage to actually even do this, but if we can make the realities of like European imperialism, colonialism, and systemic racism like mandatory or part of the school curriculum, if it's powers that you've got within your city and your authority, because like, believe it or not, like there is a lot, and I mean a lot that is omitted from our history, but I guess by excluding the evils of like imperialism, along with how members of immigrant backgrounds, African diaspora and immigrants have really contributed to our countries and across Europe. Like it feels if like our children and the young people of our cities and our regions are completely robbed of understanding how colonialist ideology was implemented, and most importantly, how it still kind of contributes to the unfair systems of power that many people are still living with and across today. And finally, just want to kind of just touch upon just one of the kind of aspects is that I guess one of the many things that we should also be doing and is addressing the intersections of inequality, I guess, to truly tackle, to say, structural racism, like all our cities, our country, we kind of really have to recognize that intersectional dimensions of racism. This means recognizing that in some situations, a person can be discriminated against on a combination of grounds that interact and I guess are impossible to untangle and to disassociate, therefore creating a specific experience of discrimination. For example, climate, and I know just when I joined, there was a lady who was briefly touched upon on climate. But like the fight of climate justice is the fight of all our lives. And however, like as we already know, the effects of the climate crisis are massively unequal and unfair. So it was created by the privileged few, but it is hitting ethnic minorities and Black people in marginalized communities the hardest. So we can't talk about the climate crisis without recognizing that it is also an inequality issue. And even within the UK, if we look at the areas that have got where the most pollution happens, if we look at within a city where air pollution is the most, where you've got the kind of like where fracking takes place, it's always in the poor communities. It's always in the communities where Black and brown people live the most. So we also kind of need to acknowledge that intersection as well.
Mi sentite? Oh.
Can you hear me? All right. Okay. All right, very good, thank you. So now we are going to conclude with the last question, and well, I will try to to ask you again about action and about experience. So because, well, you know, we have the honor to have these two very distinguished guests, the European president, the president of the European Network Against Racism, and also an activist who's also a politician. We have to say that, well, since you were mayor and also you had experience at the European Parliament. So I'd like to ask you again, well, actually about young people. I'd like to focus on the youth and also Majid. Well, you said some very important, interesting things that should be further discussed. But anyhow, I'd like to ask you about communication, education, and also policies for the young people. Can you tell us, can you give us some ideas? Could you tell us what we could do about and for young people? Karen, I leave the floor to you.
People, I'm really hopeful. I'm really hopeful because the figures show that the FRA has shown it. We have studies here in Germany, in the UK. I've seen them in the Netherlands as well. If we look at the tolerance of the rate of tolerance of racism within the group under 25, it's smaller than 30%. If we look at that same figure at the population, I believe over 35, at least that these are figures for Germany, we see a much higher rate of tolerance of racism. So what we can constate is that looking at the youth, looking at how young people live together, at how diverse the young community is in Germany, for example, you have the so-called population with the migrational background, which is about 25%. And then if you look at the under 18, it's even 40%. So diversity is normality for or is the status quo for young people. But what we also do see is how young people can be influenced by the dictators, can be influenced by the right-wing rhetoric that has also been mainstreamed in the past. You see that on social websites. You do see it that it's been happening in schools and so on and so forth. So what do the youth need? I believe they need a strong sense of right and wrong when it comes to education. Here we need, and we talked about that earlier, we need to refrain and step back from the fear of talking about racism and also from the fear of talking about race, and really need to address the issue. This kind of knowledge needs to be core knowledge in our schools. I can only speak for Germany, and I know that that's not the case. We don't talk about the colonial past of Germany in German schools. We don't talk about the effect that this has had on several communities, and I'm not only talking about the Black community here. And we don't talk about the status quo when it comes to racism. What is racism? How does it affect people of color and black and brown people? So these are questions that need to be addressed in class, but I also see a lack of capacity within the teachers that are supposed to lecture our young people, our young students, because here you either have a huge lack of knowledge because it's not been addressed within their education as becoming a teacher. You also see that the corpus of teachers is mainly white, so there's no own experience here. And you also see that there is kind of a shift or a hierarchy in importance of what young people need to learn and what not. And when it comes to these questions of racism, racism is at the bottom. And maybe to finish this part, also the material that we use. when we look at the student books in Germany, there has been a study on that 7 or 8 years ago. The picture of Black and brown people is always the same. They're never part of the general society, but are always either the poor population, part of the poor population, the foreigners, the so-called foreigners. And then it even goes worse when we look at different countries. Africa then becomes a country where everyone is poor, or where you only have wild animals on one side and poor people on the other side. So these are the pictures that young people get from the very beginning, starting in kindergarten, and following out through their whole education. So we need to go about this in several ways. Here in Germany, as the school system is not organized on a federal level, but within the Bundesländer. So I believe this decentralized way of teaching our children brings opportunity. Yeah, brings opportunity for municipalities to move forward with very good examples, which then can be spread in the whole country. That is linked to education. When it comes to communication, and here there's Majid also mentioned it, that we need this clear commitment from the cities, and I believe it's crucial that the cities take a clear stand that is visible. Here in Germany, we have the program called Democracy Live, and they're coming up with a new big campaign which shows how they want to tackle racism, and which also shows that racism does exist, and that the country as such is trying to fight it. And I think here we have different campaigns from cities. Berlin is the way you want to be, or something like that. So all these kinds of fancy campaigns can be linked with context, can be linked with content of the anti-racist struggle. Because as long as we don't talk about it publicly, the issue will always be pushed aside, or always be linked to the minorities, to the people of color and Black and brown communities that are affected by it.
Ora la parola a Majid.
To Majid for the last comment. Well, Majid, actually, you have already given us lots of ideas, lots of indications on how to act. So, Majid, the floor to you.
Thank you very much. So yeah, I just wanted to touch upon from what Karen was saying. It's, I guess we all know what it takes to, like, what needs to be done to really tackle systemic racism. And even from a city's point of view, like, that we know some great examples of things we can do. We've got the research to back it up. We know what it is that we need to do. And I think the only thing that is lacking is the political will and the courage. Like, do we really, like, have what it takes? Are we going to be bold enough to be like, yes, this is what we're going to do as a city. We're going to spearhead it. And I think that's what it kind of comes down to, because at times we can really spend so much time discussing whether there's an issue with racism, just to kind of make ourselves feel as if like we're doing something constructive, yet even though we're not necessarily doing anything constructive at all. And in the UK, we recently had Black History Month, which is every October, which is dedicated to all things like Black history and just celebrating it. So it's a time where I guess a lot of people end up talking about race and stuff like that. And of course, on the back of the recent June protests that we saw and all across Europe and across the world for that matter, and George Floyd protests, and it kind of just makes me think, like, it's, why did it take the killing of a American and to spark an international movement when we know there's been massive police brutality all across Europe? Look at Adama Traore in France, who died in police custody. Even we've got several cases in the UK. But then it's like, it literally took just the death of George Floyd caused the the European Commission to have a specific meeting about and how to tackle racism. Yet it wasn't bothered in tackling racism and before. And I guess even just something that kind of comes to mind, it's at times we see a lot of politicians that do a lot of performative politics. Because even in the UK, we had like politicians that would bend the knee and they will take the knee and they'll do all the great symbols of and tackling racism. But when it actually comes down to what really matters in terms of policy and action, they're just nowhere to be seen. So it's as if like they will take those, do those performative things, but when it comes down to it, they're nowhere and to be seen and at all, to be honest. And it's like, fair enough, we can say Black Lives Matter, even like from, to give an example of like the European Union, we can say Black Lives Matter, yet when it comes to the Black lives of those migrants who are fleeing for safety, those Black lives don't matter. So some Black lives matter. So it's just, there's a lot of hypocrisy that goes with everything, and in all honesty. But I guess one of the things like, and that gives me hope, like Karen also said, is a lot of young people. And I guess one powerful vehicle that young people have been using to tackle racism, and especially by trying to really win the hearts and minds of people, is through arts and culture. Because you see, like, arts really kind of helps us identify with one another, and it really expands our notion of we and collectiveness, and whether that be from a local perspective or a global perspective. And I guess there's a reason why far-right racist groups and governments always attack the arts first. Even in the UK, like the arts is something that's always massively underfunded and stuff like that. And I would even go as far as, it's just like, I personally believe that art really engenders empathy, and it's really hard and difficult to be an empathetic person and be a racist at the same time. And I've got no research to back up what I'm going to say next, but I would not be surprised. I would argue that having a lack of arts of culture, having a lack of arts and culture in a city or a region really gives space for far right groups to kind of rise up. So I think there's real important aspect of arts, the role that arts and culture has. And I guess just another thing I really just wanted to touch upon was from an education point of view. I know we talk about like education in schools and that sort of stuff, but also what training can be done for like politicians, to like organizations, companies. Like you've got such things as like unconscious bias training, anti-racist training, and anti-oppression training, and it's all of these trainings they really, and especially when it comes to unconscious bias, it really impacts our recruitment decisions and our employee development, impairing diversity, retention rates, as well as promoting, I guess, a disconnected culture. So it is really, really vital for organizations and companies and political groups to really address unconscious bias, and in order to really develop and maintain an inclusive workforce. And I know, to give a UK example, like the Labour Party in the UK, and say that for all their elected representatives, all the MPs, they're going to do compulsory training. But it's just, again, it's at least that's something to tackle a problem. So I reckon it's just also not only education for young people, but also we can continually educate ourselves.
Really, thanks a lot to our first two guests. And well, thank you really. And we were looking forward to listening to you. And well, thank you for all the ideas that you gave us. Well, both of you, Karen and Majid, thank you again for being with us. Have a nice afternoon, both of you. Thank you again. All right, so well, we can start earlier. I'd like, so here we are, we can start earlier. I'd like to ask you if, well, if you're all there, can we start now? Can we start 5 minutes earlier? So I'm asking the technicians if they can confirm to me that we can start now. So 5 minutes earlier. All right, so they are telling me that well, San Lazzaro di Savona is not here yet. So one of the municipalities that will participate in this roundtable is not here yet. Our neighbors. So the mayor of San Lazzaro di Savona will attend the roundtable, but she's not here yet. Well, obviously, we said that we will start at 4, so we understand her. I know that all the other mayors are already here. So I can give you a preview about what is going to happen. We are going to have a roundtable among, well, with some mayors. We will have a few questions for them. So I will ask the same question to all of you, mayors, and then I will get into more specific details. Also, the deputy mayor of Sarajevo will be with us. And it's very important to hear the voice of a city from the Balkans. Sarajevo is a city that has a lot to say about these topics. And also, well, we will have a twin city with Bologna. We've been twinned for a very long time. We will have a video from the mayor of Portland in the US, so from Oregon, the mayor, Mr. Ted Wheeler, and you will certainly like the video. Well, you will be quite impressed by the video. Actually, the mayor was a protagonist during the protests for Black Lives Matter, and he will also tell us what they are doing, what his administration is doing towards the police. And this is a very vital, very crucial topic, not just in the United States, but really everywhere. So the policies coming from the United States for sure can teach us something. So for sure they can teach us something in Italy. I'm talking about Italy because this is what I know. And well, from the control room, they are telling me that the mayor of San Lazzaro is not with us yet. We still have a couple of minutes to 4. I'd also like to remind you that as well as Councillor Marco Lombardo, who spoke at the beginning of the conference, he is our councillor in Bologna. He also deals with migration policies. We also have Mr. Giusta, the mayor of the councillor of Turin, and he also deals with human rights. So we're just waiting another minute. It would be nice to have all the attendees with us. I would like to thank our technicians. Thank you. Thanks to our control room for, well, keeping me updated. So I'd also like to ask Lucia. She's She's more expert than I am. So I'd like to ask her, shall we start now or shall we wait for the municipality of San Lazzaro to be with us? Shall we wait or shall we start, Lucia? Well, I see that she has just arrived, so the municipality of San Lazzaro is also with us. She's actually writing on the chat, so Giusy, we can start. All right, so perfect. Thank you. Well, thank you and welcome Isabella Conti, the mayor of San Lazzaro di Savena. Thank you for being with us and welcome to our roundtable, mayor's roundtable. So I would like to start from a few things which are very important to understand the context of this period in Europe related to anti-discrimination policies.
This is what the President of the European Commission made on a speech in 2020. We need to talk about racism, said Ursula von der Leyen. We also have to react. It is always possible to change direction if you are willing to do so. I'm happy to live in a society that condemns racism, but we have to do more than simply condemning racism. The motto is united in diversity. Our task is being the task, attaching a concrete meaning to these words. So once again, I think that these words are, let's say, compliance with all what we would like to investigate on, learn and share in these days. So this is my first question I would like to share with the administrators listening to us. Policies against the racism and discrimination may be considered will a virtuous niche in public administration. So virtuous, but not strategic. You share this sentence? And what about your administrations? I mean, what are your administrations doing to tackle this issue? Because inevitably, I mean, there are some tensions, if you will, inside, I mean, policy of a specific administration. Maybe what I say is something that people don't say, but this is something that people do. So how can we favor policies that can be sort of, interesting and relevant of all the sectors of the administration? Marco Lombardo may be the first one to reply. He will be the last one in the second round of questions. Marco. Giusy, thank you so much. Okay, I'm back in Italian. I'd like to once again thank all of you, and I'm doing this again in Italian right now. So thank you so much to all the mayors, the local administrators, my colleagues, and others in many other towns. Well, this is what you said at the very beginning when mentioning, I mean, the words of Ursula von der Leyen. United in diversity, it is much more than the slogan or the motto of the European Union, but this is also the key pillar, the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union, which is once again a key pillar, I mean, the real big milestone or stepstone in terms of the policies we implement. Now, the main topic we're going to deal with in this Congress is much more than having a dialogue between administrators or so-called, let's say, experts and technicians, but we also have to favor a public debate so that afterwards we'll have actions. Now, the governance is now multi-governance, multi-player, multi-level. To do so, we need to understand that racism has basis or different forms. Forms, by the way, I'm thinking of in cases of attacks or what happened with this pandemic with some prejudices or commonplaces towards foreigners. But this may also happen with invisible actions. I'm thinking of the prejudice of the war all barriers in terms of accessing the labor market or having access to home, a shelter, education, removing barriers. Now, cities really have to do so much. Even, I mean, behind, the European regulations, inviting minorities to take for their would make a big in thinking that maybe people, communities, or towns with no prejudices or commonplaces or stereotypes. There's no herd immunity towards the pandemic, but also towards the racism. So Eccar in the action plan guides us in creating horizontal policy. We start from the administration, but then we move outside, involving as many stakeholders. By the way, I'm inviting you to visit the brand new website of the Zonarelli Cultural Center in the city of Bologna. It's always been the home of the Foreigners Association in Bologna. We have co-planned and co-designed a plenty of initiatives in terms of education, art, culture, because what we want is to promote diversity and inclusion. Now, for me, a key element is listening. When you listen, you need to have voices. I mean, you need to have people who can, become witnesses. I mean, those who have received, acts of racism or discrimination, has always taken to work based on data, based on knowledge of these facts. So we need data, we need evidence to make sure we can see racism, we can understand discrimination at school, in terms of education, in terms of the right communication on, let's say, information and even training of staff. Just to mention some concrete actions, so the city of Bologna this year presented its candidature of the Accessible Towns Prize in order to move discrimination towards disabled people or elderly because of their possibility of becoming disabled. In 2018, the city of Bologna, after a long process, we have voted PAL, which is a non-discriminatory administration plan based on human rights. This is the opportunity to work, to overcome sort of a dichotomy that we have migration. Sometimes people fear migrants. We sort of see them as victims. We just have to favor the new protagonism of the diaspora. We can do this with the so-called Glow Bologna. So we're not talking about the first or second generation. We talk about new citizens. We don't talk about them. We talk with them. In the training and education program, the so-called PAL for our staff, in 2018, we have trained 200 officials, 20 in local neighborhoods, hundreds of social workers, 20 agents of the local police, and 30 other, managers representing different sectors. With our front offices, our city can be a barrier, but also the first open door. Just a couple of final considerations. Education and training for local enforcement agents. Well, we share the so-called community police forces. We talk about the role of local police in a transcultural society by taking into account the UK police parameters. We want to know better our role and the local communities. This means that the work group will go through different tangible activities. Next year, we will promote an action plan for the local police forces and enforcement agencies, considering ethics and deontology. Once again, I'm talking about ethics, code of ethics for European police. I think that based on in the US, but also in our territory. So, for example, with the Black Lives Matter movement, we understand that this kind of education and training activities is so important. Last but not least at all, as Benedetto Saccheroli already talked about this in Zaki. Now, the Municipal Council, the Bologna administration, and the university, we've given the honorary citizenship to Zaki, because we believe in freedom of expression. We think that freedom and respect responsibility go hand in hand. We also believe in a new sense of belonging to a community, where belonging to a community like the one here in Bologna, well, this means that you have to feel that you have people inside of you promoting, fostering dialogue, fostering listening, and a new reckoning, a new reasoning. This means we have to fight against the prejudices, the stereotypes, and commonplaces. No city, no territory is free from the risk of racism and discrimination. Mr. Lombardo, thank you so much for this. So, same question that I would like to share with Milan Sivic, Vice Mayor Sarajevo.
Okay, can I speak now? Because it was problem with the sound and I'm not sure it is technically everything okay. Okay, I can start. Before I answer the first question, I'd like to say a few remarks in order to understand the position from which I am speaking. First, something about position of the city of Sarajevo. The city of Sarajevo is not city government. I think this is the unique position of the city in the world. The real power belongs to the local and regional level, which are the municipality of the level between municipality and the canton. Between those two levels of authority, the city Sarajevo has only small symbolic meaning. And just a few words about me. I saw in the paper here that the chairwoman is my colleague journalist, and I spend all my life in journalism, but I'm now here deputy mayor. The way I became deputy mayor can be interesting for our topic today. I think about the principle of equality. It is said that the Bosnian key has three arms. The rule of equality implies the rule that members from three different ethnic groups must hold three key positions in one institution. That is how I am here. And something about about the question, first question. Bosnia, I think, is good example where the success of politics for and against human rights, discrimination, intolerance, and social inclusion can be compared. The negative policy, which is against the positive value, is more aggressive, hyperactive, more brutal, and more successful, I think. A policy that advocates positive value deals with consequences and is therefore not successful enough. In Bosnia, in 90s, in just 2 years, the positive direction of the society has been changed. This has been going on for 30 years. Instead of an inclusive society, Bosnia has become a divided society that supports exclusive values. Like the most devastating earthquake, Bosnia was experienced total social destruction. It is difficult to understand the dimension of that destruction. In America nowadays, Trump was only for 4 years. Imagine what would happen like if he stayed in America in the power for 30 years. The question is how to answer the most important question. How is possible for society to move in opposite direction of civilization. And Bosnian case and what happened in Bosnia shows it is possible. Nationalists generate hatred and division of society, and they called it democracy. They called discrimination and intolerance towards other ethnic group patriotism. Human rights are being replaced by collective rights, and they have called it a struggle for ethnic equality. The technique of making such discriminatory decision can be institutional and not non-institutional. For example, Bosnian institutions of the education system make the decision to segregate students in schools. This decision is discriminatory, but it was adopted according to democratic procedure and it is implemented in practice. The system is sometimes forced to make a formal democratic decision institutionally, but outside the institution, it is decided that such decision will be never implemented. Reasons and justification can always be found for such kind of decision. During these 30 years, the rules has been confirmed in Bosnia that the position against is much more efficient than position for, than policy for. But hope never dies. Changes are always possible, this time in positive direction. In the local election a few days ago, incredible changes took place. For the first time, in the central municipality of the state capital, citizens said no to ethnic nationalism. For the first time, the majority ethnic population did not vote for the so-called own candidate, but for the candidate for the minority ethnic group. It is, I hope, the beginning of political revolution and changes that are condition for an equal and tolerant society. This is answer for my first question. Thank you.
Grazie a Vice Kotinic.
Thank you. Now I'd like to ask the councillor if, well, the councillor wants to express his point of view. Well, good morning, good afternoon to all of you. I hope you can hear me. Well, first of all, thank you. Thanks for the very kind invitation. It's a great pleasure for me to be here with such a high-level panel of experts. Obviously, the answer is not easy. The answer is not so straightforward. But I would like to well, start by saying that local administrations are at the center of the fight against the discrimination. First of all, because we are so close to citizens, and also because at local level, that's where you usually see most of the problems, tension, different clashes among the different groups that are part of our communities. So the local communities have to provide an answer to these problems and phenomena, but we can't do that by ourselves. We need to have a national plan. We also need to have an international support. This is why we decided that the city of Turin had to be part of Eccar. We needed to have the knowledge and the competence of this network. And also, we need good policies, obviously. We need policies that are not just nice to look at. we need to have alliances as well. We also need to have, well, alliances with the other institutions or associations, local associations. We also need to have alliances at international, national and international level in order to make sure that we go deeper into the topics that we want to deal with. As Lombardo said earlier, absolutely, the public administration needs to have data. We need to have detailed knowledge. We also need to have the ability to provide answers that put the people at the center with their needs. Well, obviously, it's easy to speak, to say that, well, we have inclusive cities generating wealth possibilities for the future, attractiveness for the youth, and, well, less social tension. It's easy to say that, and we know that these are the objectives. We know that people with a migratory background or people with certain barriers like language barriers, psychological, and also regulatory barriers when it comes to having access to services. Well, we know that also during the pandemic, these people have had or are still experiencing difficulties. So now we need to understand how to satisfy their needs without discriminations. This is vital. Well, we want to have a more inclusive society, obviously, as we said. But, well, in order to do that, I think we should imagine the cost of a non-inclusive society. A non-inclusive society where all these problems are becoming bigger are also much more expensive, of course, because we need to spend much more money in order to solve those problems that we should have solved earlier. So it is economically convenient to be non-discriminatory. This is what I wanted to say. We have, well, been thinking, obviously, and we thought that we have to start ourselves first. The city of Turin has more than 7,000 people working for the municipality. So probably the municipality is the biggest, one of the biggest companies in our area. And this is why we have decided that it is very important to spread awareness among our staff. So the public administration is trying to structure itself in order to raise awareness among ourselves and in order to give better services to all our citizens. So again, we're trying to put together the different pieces of our public administration. And above all, we're trying to give our citizens the feel that things are changing. There's better access to services. We also help people have access to services. And also, another thing that is absolutely important, and it has allowed us to achieve very important results. For example, our event called Open Mosques. So open mosques last year, we also talked about it last year at Eccar. So these are initiatives that were co-designed together with the population. In this way, our people are protagonists of our policies. And then also, at the moment, we are copying something from Bologna because we want to learn from other people's or other municipalities' experiences. We have, well, we said, just like the skyline of Turin, anti-racism is a common asset. So it is a common asset for our city. It has to be safeguarded, and therefore we have to hand it out to our next generations. So this is why we have identified that anti-racism is a common asset for our city. We want to preserve it. We want to learn more and more things, and we want to define active policies. So we had like a public call. We invited associations, organizations, and more than 70 of them responded to our call. Together with them, we are trying to define every year the objectives for the next year to be achieved at municipal level, and those objectives will have to be part of our plan of goals for our public administration, and those objectives will be part of our annual plan for our activities for the following year. For sure, there's still a lot to learn, and we're really happy to be here today. Thank you for giving us lots of knowledge and some hope for the future. Well, thank you. Thanks for your energy. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Councillor Giusta from Turin. I would like to take the chance just to say something. Well, Mayor Conti should sign out and then she should come back with the other email. Sorry, this is just a message to Mayor Conti, because otherwise she won't be able to speak. I know that Deputy Mayor Privic wanted to speak, so if you're still there, please, I give the floor to you.
I didn't understand Italian. I understand few words, but I suppose it is the interesting case from Bosnia about phenomenon two schools under one roof. This is an example of discrimination in Bosnia, which is introduced after the war. And I'd like to just explain the background and the context of that problem. First of all, I'd like to say that Bosnia and Herzegovina as a state existed for 1,000 years. Codes against racism and discrimination are embodied in our social genetics. For example, Bosnia is a country where slavery never existed, not even in the Middle Age. Here, living together in diversity, tolerance, and equality is natural phenomenon. The war of the 90s is one of the greatest crime in our history. It is a crime against our culture of living together. The Dayton Peace Agreement gave the people who waged the war also the right to manage the peace process. That is why everything is the same in Bosnia after the war. We have a war policy only without weapons. That is why it is possible that today, in the 21st century, in Europe, we have segregation in schools. In the war, we had ethnic cleansing. But today, we have two schools under one roof, where children are separated just because they belong to different ethnic groups. Sarajevo is a multi-ethnic city in its spirit, culture, and historical being. But today we have two Sarajevo, which, according to the structure of the population, are predominantly two monoethnic cities. This is why the school problem here has a different form here in Sarajevo. 2 kilometers here from my office is the entity line between Sarajevo and East Sarajevo. Moving over the line is free. At first glance, everything looks normally like when we live in one city. But I will explain you normality, that kind of normality, with just one example, with the names of two educational institutions. The dormitory on the other side of the line is named after convicted war criminal Radon Karadzic. On this side of the line, an elementary school is named after Mustafa Busulagic, who was associated with the Nazis during Second War. Unfortunately, it is clear from this example that those who were masters of war and who are now leading the peace process intend to educate new generation who will wage the new wars with or without weapons. Here today, after 30 years, it is fifth day of hope after uh, our last local election. I hope both Bosnia and Sarajevo will return to the natural being, and I hope we will overcome this problem soon. Thank you.
Language at the bottom bar. In this way, you will be able to listen the conference in English for you, information for you. Bene, adesso
Very well. I'd like now to know if I can ask a question to Isabella Conti, the mayor. Is it possible? Okay, maybe she hasn't connected yet. Okay, just 1 second. Okay, not yet with us. Okay, let me continue. Let me continue with other questions. Now, Vice Mayor Milan Trivic talked about a very specific situation having to do with his city, Sarajevo. And he also mentioned a very important topic. I mean, it's a specific situation in his city, the so-called two schools under one roof. So these are schools or buildings where you have children with different ethnic groups. They cannot, let's say, learn together. So this is basically a segregation. This is what the OECD said. Let me now give the floor to Benedetto Zaccheroli. Okay, with pleasure, I'm now giving the floor to you. Is it true you have raised your hands? Yes. I'd like to say what many people in Eccar would say. So all what we heard in the previous panel, but also in this panel, I think that all of this is really very interesting. I mean, what was said from the city of Turin, you know, the vice mayor said that, she has copied from Bologna. Anyway, there's Creative Commons here on the Eccar system, so it's okay like this. But on the other side, I really would like to say, Sarajevo, please come to Eccar. Otherwise, I will, you know, force you into joining us. Now, this is fundamental. So we need to have more time, and we have to have, you know, this top level of discussion. So I have Isabella Conti. She's telling me that she's not able to get back. I don't know. I didn't know how to manage this request for her. But anyway, just would like to say congratulations, everyone. Let's keep doing what we are doing today. Okay. Once again, I'm sure that technicians are now helping Isabella Conti. So once again, I really would like to thank our, you know, top technicians. So thank you so much, by the way, for all what you are doing, and I'm sure that they will help Isabella out of that cul-de-sac so that she can come back as quickly as possible. Anyway, right now, what we have to do is, and let me ask again our technicians, so why don't we have a look at the video from the mayor of Portland, Ted. Well, it's a very interesting video, so let's listen to our... Okay.
Greetings to all who are joining us for this annual gathering to help us learn from each other how best to fight inequity and racism in our communities. I'm Ted Wheeler, Mayor of Portland, Oregon. I want to thank Mayor Merola from our sister city of Bologna, Italy, for inviting me here to join in these important conversations. As I'm sure you know, across the United States, calls for racial justice, social and economic equity, and an end to racial discrimination have never been louder. The same is true here in Portland, where tens of thousands of people continue to demand change to the unjust practices embedded in our current political, social, and economic systems. That is the root of the anger, anxiety, and social unrest that we're experiencing in Portland right now, much of it tied to public safety and policing. As a city, we're working hard to listen to people who too often have gone unheard. We're reforming our police oversight system after voters demanded change. We've cut the budget for the police by $27 million and reinvested much of it back into our community. And we're creating a new system to respond to people suffering mental health crises so police can respond instead to crimes that require their skills and expertise. And we're just beginning. We hear our community's call for change. We will continue to take action to reduce racism and injustice. Thanks to the Black Lives Matter movement, we have a rare opportunity to create a new vision for our community, to capture the moment for racial justice, to end systems of oppression, and to reimagine what public safety looks like. I'm excited to build a new vision for our city that is more just, equitable, and inclusive. I will know we are successful when everyone feels safer than they do today. I believe that together we can harness the energy on the street and channel it to create real and lasting change. I appreciate that everyone here understands the urgent need to act against racism, not only throughout Europe, but all around the world. Thank you for the work that you do.
Contribution from Mr. Wheeler, the mayor of Portland, Oregon, is very interesting. First of all, because well, this is one of those mayors who started, the battle directly, and during many of the events and even riots that have taken place in Portland. After the explosion of protests after the death of George Floyd. Well, the mayor has spent time, in the street, in the squares of the city. And he also talked about some brutal behavior from the police forces in his city. So he talked about, saving money on, police forces budget. It's a hot topic, but it is really, really very important as a topic because, so once again, if you save some money on police forces, well, this money, it sounds like a paradox, but it becomes an investment in a higher level of safety, in some local neighborhoods or local communities, because of course we save money on weapons and arms. So once again, I think that this is a positive contribution. It raises questions and it is great food for thought. Thank you so much. I have a question for our guests today because, we really, really would like to have Isabella Conte, so the mayor, back. So we're trying to do all what we can do to make sure she can re-establish this connection. Now, some of you, and of course I'm considering Mr. Lombardo, Mr. Justa, but also the Vice Mayor Trivic in Sarajevo. I hope he can hear me. Do you want to reply to those questions? Do you have some feedback or your personal opinions? So once again, don't hesitate to just click on the hands up icon, thank you, on the list. Okay then, so if there are no feedbacks or no questions now, let me continue with the second round of questions that I had foreseen. So I'd like to go back to Vice Mayor Trivic. Mr. Trivic, can you hear me? Okay, very well. Thank you. Great. You have talked already about the situation of schools in Sarajevo, which is a very special situation you have in Sarajevo, and well, not only in Sarajevo, but of course, we need to talk about your policies. We also have to mention, the war that you fought there around 30 years ago. But is something coming out of those fights? I mean, do you have some good, just policies? Are you fighting against the racism and discrimination in Sarajevo? Because we talked about the school project. Of course, that project, well, still has a long way to go. Do you have a positive example that you want to talk to us about?
It is very difficult to talk about positive examples because the people are on the power who introduced this system. And if we want to change, uh, it is not possible for city of Sarajevo, especially city of Sarajevo, because we don't have big, great political power to change the thing. But we can just influence, and we can do something for the problem and talk about the problem. But we can't take any decision to move to change the thing. But it is problem. We have nationalistic party on the power, and this is their policy. And the only way to change and to solve this problem of discrimination is to remove those political party from the power and make free political institution that they can take a right decision not only in the school, in the whole society. And what is special problem because everybody knows about ethnic cleansing in Bosnia that's happened during the war, which a different army cleaned the territory from the minority, on the people who are in smaller group in that territory. And this process is not finished yet. And we have the problem with the school and other similar problem in those cities like Mostar, like Stolac on the south, on Bosnia and Herzegovina, where the process of ethnic cleansing is not finished. And again, I must say that we can't solve the problem with any decision, with political declaration and so on and so on. It can influence and lead to the decision and to make situation as it is now. But we can't change the thing. And I hope with this case I explain you what happened here in the city of Sarajevo, in the central municipality. This can be beginning of changing everything. Thank you.
Vice Mayor, thank you so much for this. Okay, I have a couple of, well, final wrap-up questions. So once again, we're still, waiting for Isabella Conti, the mayor. Anyway, just a couple of final questions that I had prepared for vice mayors, Marco Giusta and Marco Lombardo. I'd like to start with Mr. Giusta. And, well, I'm going to talk about the pandemic, so COVID-19. We cannot ignore this. We don't want to ignore this. Well, it's a short, let's say, question, but it's a difficult one. What, Mr. Justa, the consequences and the effects of pandemic on racism and on discrimination? You already talked about this briefly in your first answer. Can we have some color about this? Can we well, know more about what your city is doing? Thank you for this question. Now, it's a difficult, interesting question. You're right. I mean, it would take hours just to talk about this. Anyway, uh, to boil this down, let me tell you what we have seen in the past months. Now, I'm sure that everyone remembers the aggressions and the attacks and the discrimination of the Chinese community at the beginning of the pandemic. Not just the Chinese community, but the entire Asian community. People thought that they were Chinese. They were attacked and assaulted. I remember we had some dinner events with the Chinese community just to share with them a positive message. Well, what we saw is the increased level of intolerance. So people seem to want to look for, you know, people responsible for the COVID. Now, I'm not going to talk about social attitudes, but you know, based on what people told us, I remember the impact of the HIV pandemic back in the 1990s. There's a major striking difference now. So, if you are infected with COVID, unlike what happened some years ago, well, these persons are not accused to be a victim or even culprit. I mean, people are looking for the real people responsible for the virus. And in many cases, young people have been discriminated. People think that young people were not complying with the rule, thus disseminating, you know, spreading the virus. But you know, some people always look for the culprits. Okay, so if you find the person responsible for, you know, the virus, well, this means that many other people may, you know, feel total peace of mind, right? So sort of we have this feeling that people are now looking for those who are really responsible for the spreading of the virus. So they're really looking for the culprit. So this means that there have been new discriminations. So some people say it's their fault, but we are more important. So on the other side, so managing this difficult situation was very difficult, with some exceptions. Um, there's a Chinese family that lived in the building where we live. They have given me 10 masks. I remember that surgical masks cost something like 20, 30 euros because it was impossible to find them. Well, they have given 20 masks to every single family of the condo where they lived. So many actions, so many beautiful aspects. There was a strong local collaboration inside the Torino Plurale network. This is a network that supported the official network of the city, that in a way was also coordinated by us. Different communities, different representatives of different communities helped local communities in the city, but also in the region. There's been a very strong synergy and partnership between associations creating similar projects, but then they didn't know each other. For example, churches and mosques, trade unions and community associations. I mean, there have been plenty of links. Young people associations on the one side and elderly people associations on the other. So many things have happened, and all of this is so interesting. Now, we also understood that there was another key truth that was sort of hidden. In terms of, you know, the traditional welfare system, um, they are not in touch with one third of the population. In many other cases, they have no answers. There is no services for them. But you know, this is a health crisis. This is a social crisis. So of course, it had to be faced. Quite often, you know, those difficulties turned into so many different initiatives managed by local associations and networking associations and even volunteers associations. There's a key lesson that we have learned. In the future, when it comes to social services, this access has to be comprehensive and transparent because we really want to be able to give an answer to all of our questions. You know, some people say, well, there's a small helper, so the help has to go to me instead of going to someone else. This is wrong. We have to be working in terms of solidarity. or widespread solidarity. So that aid or those, let's say, systems have to be shared with all the local population, with all the inhabitants of this community. Okay, let me wrap up by saying that COVID-19, so the pandemic, has highlighted discrimination in a very, well, let's say, open way. For example, the economic problems. We saw that there's been an explosion of economic problems, and we discovered that many people were doing some, let's say, informal jobs, and we understood that some people received discrimination having to do with their individual, features. Thank you, Mr. Justa from Turin. Thank you for your participation and sharing, insights. Well, I have the same question actually. For the city of Bologna, keeping an eye on what is happening right now. So, Marco Lombardo, same question to you. This is the right information we want to share with the rest of the table. Wait a second, there's, okay, you know what, Mr. Lombardo, yes, at the very end, but now, yes, we managed to have Isabella Conti, the mayor, thank you so much. You managed, to get back into the conference. Okay, Mrs. Conti. Okay, let's try and, catch up the time lost concerning your participation into our debate. This is my question for you. You are the city of San Lazzaro, so it's a city very close to Bologna. So it is, basically the outskirts or the suburbs, if you will, of Bologna. Can you tell us about one best practice, or even more than one, in terms of fighting against the racism and discrimination? I also have another question. In your opinion, how can we strengthen or maybe create from scratch a network, a metropolitan network, involving the city of Bologna and all of the outskirts, the satellite towns? Some of our foreign friends may not know that in Italy we have some specific bodies, the so-called città metropolitane, so metropolitan towns. We have the 14 largest Italian cities. They are not just a city, they are a metropolitan area. With the word ente, so organization, we basically refer to a very big territory, that include, the main city and all of the satellite cities and towns. So this is a network of, municipalities. I think that, this network has all what it takes to implement policies against racism and discrimination. Pleasure for me to give the word to you. I hope you can hear me. Okay. So first of all, good evening, everyone. Okay, I'll try and be as brief as possible to catch up time. I also would like to tell you about the best practices of our administration, but also the need that this is something that we cannot postpone. We have to coordinate, the actions of all the satellite cities around Bologna. So we need to have a cooperation. We want to create, once again, a real metropolitan area in sync with plenty of other actions from other municipalities. Policies against discrimination or having to do with inclusion, well, these policies do not depend on our culture. So we need to involve as many partners as possible that you can find in a local territory and especially in a metropolitan city, so in large urban areas. We have many experiences, many different pieces making up the same puzzle, which is the vision of the world that we have here in our city. Every single action that we have implemented, well, there are many actions and I will talk about just a couple of them. So every single action that we carry out contains, if you will, a vision of world with a hierarchy of values that have to be complied with and respected. Now, we're really very proud here because in 2014, so this is when I was appointed mayor, that was 6 years ago, together with another city, close by city, Sasso Marconi, we decided to start this cooperation. So we decided to have the so-called diffused shelter centers. I mean, there was an emergency, 2014. It's still an emergency. So once again, the so-called diffused shelter points. We wanted to avoid the isolation ghettos. So diffused means that we now have offered apartments and homes and shelters to immigrants in the city. So we don't want ghettos. So people coming from far away could find, I mean, a minimum level of, let's say, shelter and food and stability of their life. So that was 6 years ago, and so we understood, I mean, the criticalities that we had 6 years ago, we still have them. One of the main critical point has to do with a job. So these persons coming from far away cannot become an active part of the community inside, I mean, the community. So one of the best practices we have created was to involve these persons as much as possible. We have offered them training. We offered them the possibility of becoming volunteers. We have a specific policy that we, created to do something different. I mean, that was, a program for volunteers. We have hundreds of volunteers here in the city. So, for example, people taking care of green areas, parks and gardens. So we had to offer all of these opportunities to immigrants, for example, some repair or maintenance works or painting. So we have signed an agreement with some insurance brokers. So every single person on a volunteer basis, you just have to participate into this registry. You have to put forward a small project. So if you want to do something for the community, we will give the material, we will give the tools, and of course these people will be covered in terms of insurance when they work. So thanks to this kind of the so-called virtuous citizen registry, we've offered plenty of opportunities to people coming from far away, so they all registered into this registry, and so this continues today, and they still, they work, and they really, commit themselves for our city, San Lazzaro, and also for the local community. I think this is a fundamental step forward because on the one side, I mean, these people feel they are an active part, they are fully integrated into the community. They come from, far away. Usually they are, men, young people. They really want to feel, at home. And this is why they want to take care of the local community. So, we want to do something for the local community. This means that, citizens, some people having some, personal limits or cultural background, I mean, different backgrounds, they started changing their mind. I mean, prejudice and commonplaces were removed because, they really had this feeling of being able to count on them, to count on immigrants. I mean, they really, really wanted to work and to become an active, citizen in the community. There's another key point we believe in so much. It's a virtuous project. I mean, we work with the media tech and our local theater. So there are so many people here in our city. They organize the drama lessons. They worked in the local theaters. So they have worked with, their peers, so young people. They have learned Italian. They had the opportunity to exchange experiences. And once again, they have created some theater plays, something so moving, so beautiful to see and to listen to. Once again, they are now parts of our community. Once again, what is fundamental is the language. So once again, immigrants have to learn quickly our language. So Italian is the first and most important tool because this is the most important expression tool. There's been a huge effort on citizens. So some citizens fight back. maybe they still live in prejudice or commonplaces. They are frozen, stuck into their prejudice. So I think this is a critical moment in time, the pandemic. The pandemic generates distance. It is not just a social distancing, it's becoming a distance which is social, which is physical. So people think that, other people may be enemies, they may be the source of infection. So this physical distances may become a spiritual, emotional distance with the rest of the community. And of course, we have to fight back against this. This doesn't have to happen. Marginalization, and so once again, this is what happens, in this moment. I'm on the other seen as an enemy, something different, someone different, a potential danger, a potential risk, maybe a source of ruin, death, and poverty, or lack of safety and security. So we have the duty, because we are a public administration. Um, I do agree with what the vice mayor from Turin said. Local administrators have to do this. I mean, mayors, but also vice mayors. If you will, we are the last frontier of the central government, between the governments and people. So this is what we have today. We have to take the entire community by hand, and we have to go towards a new, different, inclusive direction. So thanks to the words we are using and the initiatives we create, we have to be strong enough to send and convey the right message, new messages. I'm thinking of courses for our local police forces, for the enforcement agencies, but also for the staff and the employees of the municipal authorities. We have offered courses for everyone, for every single citizen here. So training is the key word, especially when it comes to civil servants or officials representing local institutions. They have to be able to become drivers. They are able to create a new awareness in citizens, thanks to new awareness raising campaigns, by using the right words, by using the right language based on dignity and respect. I think that this is the key point here. So we have to be authoritative institutions. And I'm sure that the so-called metropolitan cities, so all the communities around Bologna, when I say authoritative institutions, I mean institutions that they don't have to have an ideological approach. If you also and only work with ideology, we may create distance. We have to show that inclusion is feasible, it's possible, it's an evolved, highly developed form of living that creates well-being and wealth for everyone. Not just in terms of sociology or anthropology, but in terms of new opportunities that are still, untapped, that we have here. So new opportunities means jobs, new companies, association, exchange, cultural development, cultural growth. So much has to be done to do this, because now we have people which are really frightened. The pandemic, unfortunately, is exacerbating economic difficulties. We need to really read and understand reality. I mean, if we want to remove the walls, if we really want to get into the hearts of those who do not want to understand that racism is wrong, the world is very complex. So once again, they think they are very violent. They are very, let's say, close, narrow-minded. These people don't have to be judged. I mean, we need to understand, their distress, and we have to turn distress into something positive. And this distress is based on lack of training or schooling, so it depends on your background. But it also depends on the fact that some people think that there's no future. The future is no longer perceived, just like some years ago, as a sort of a promise, maybe a challenge. It is perceived as a source of fear, fright, hunger, misery. It's a paradox, because some people really, really, experience, these problems. So it's a paradox. Anyway, we have to be able to make sure that people know we are offering them safety, security, equity, justice for all, same equal opportunities for all. If you have the same equal opportunities, same equal conditions for all, well, then we are able to make a big leap forward towards evolution, so towards a different world. As for the metropolitan city, it has a major power, and right now, these policies are so important, and this is a great opportunity. We have to do this on a current, let's say, in our municipalities. For example, we work in schools. Quite often, children go back home and they teach something to their parents. They talk to their parents, and sometimes they tell us that, the position of their father or their mother is not the right one. So this is a growth opportunity also for parents. So school is absolutely fundamental. This is the real, let's say, foundations for the future. And I'm pretty sure that, the so-called metropolitan city body has to create new initiatives to be shared with municipalities at school. It's something that everyone can do, everyone can take part. We may have maybe a big, large event where we can share policies. We can also have new policies or initiatives. For example, exhibitions, let's say visiting different towns, just like a tour. Next spring, we will have some photographic exhibitions, 4 exhibitions for women from all over the world. There's one photographer, an extraordinary woman, who has taken pictures of couples, being together, and then some couples that quite late were brave enough to to say that they were gay or same-sex couples. Now there's a beautiful boulevard in our city, which is a very Viale degli Innamorati, so the boulevard of people in love. There will be huge panels, and there will be people there. Some people, well, elderly people, being together since ever, and we will see them in different moments during their day. So we need to invite people to visit, these exhibitions, so you can really see something which is different versus our habits, understanding the value of human being, understanding the need of staying together. Very last point. We fought a major battle in order to have free of charge infant toddler centers in our city. So we started in 2019, so there's no waiting list. All the children of the city can go to school, infant toddler centers and kindergartens for free. Some people said, well, rich people have to pay. Well, I'd like to say that I think that infant toddler centers or even kindergartens, this is the place where we can really remove barriers. First of all, I have built top quality public schools so that even the richest, wealthiest people can bring their children to a public context, because there they can find top quality training and top quality education. Kindergartens and infant toddler centers have to be free and free of charge for everyone. So even the people who, from the cultural point of view, don't have the same open-mindedness. Maybe they think, I will never go to a public school because, in their culture, this means abandoning their children. Or, maybe it's very difficult, to manage this, something that doesn't belong to some cultures. Well, you have people coming from far away, immigrants, and they will take their children to a top quality, free of charge kindergarten with their children growing, playing in the same classroom, in the same space, in the same context with Italian children having different backgrounds. Just imagine their parents, they have different backgrounds. They look at their children playing with Italian children, playing with many other ethnic groups. So they can talk about their children, they can talk about the future of their children. Well, this is the real, this is fundamental. This means active hope and removing walls and barriers. So I'd like to see the same projects also in the rest of the metropolitan city here in Bologna. because what we need is equity, justice, a huge investment on childhood and the school system. Thank you. Okay, then, thank you. Thank you so much. Let's go back to the pandemic. So Mrs. Conte also talked about pandemic. Marco Lombardo, I have the last question for you. You also take care of employment and labor policies in Bologna. This is a useful piece of information because we're talking about pandemic. So I have the same question, and please wrap up. So, which are the consequences and the effects of pandemic on the racism and discrimination? So, it's a difficult question, but I'm sure you are up to the task, please.
Thank you. Well, actually, I will just make reference to many of the things that have already been said by the mayor of San Lazzaro and the colleague from Turin, and also by his mayor from Sarajevo, Mr. Trivic. Well, you know, at the moment, we're all trying to tackle the same issue, that is to say, what are the effects of the pandemic with regard to racism and discrimination? If we don't do anything, for sure, it will only be negative effects. So there will only be effects, even increasing inequalities. But instead, if we do something, for sure, we will be able to do something in order not only to reduce inequalities, but also to build a new normality. The COVID-19 emergency, as well as being very dangerous from the human health point of view, is also very risky from the cultural point of view, because it tends to divide ourselves, to divide us between age brackets, by putting the blame on young people as the spreaders of the disease, or well, putting the blame on well, you know, or affecting the elderly people, affecting the elderly, who are the real victims of this disease. And also, well, you know, this pandemic is dividing our authorities even more between the national level, the local level, and also it divides us among social categories by widening the gap between the richer and the poorer. But also, you know, there are even bigger inequalities in the labor market due to the pandemic. Okay, in this area, for example, where we have a very high rate of women's well, employment, we have more than 68% of women who have a job in this in the Bologna area. Well, 52,000 jobs that have been lost during the pandemic are women's jobs. So their job, their contract has not been renewed, or many of them decided to just leave their job. So, you know, the risk is that also in the labor market, the pandemic is affecting women, it's affecting the young people that instead we should try and protect. So it's really dividing us among, well, women, young people, ethnic groups. As we said earlier, when we try to act in order to reduce the inequalities in the labor market, actually we do it in favor of everybody. Because if we have lots of irregular workers, well, this forces us to have dumping. We have, well, work that is just based on the cost of labor instead of being based on quality. Well, a survey that is called Check Migration highlighted these risks. Just a couple of data that is about Italy, but also it is about many other European countries and many other countries, for example. what is widely spread is the stereotype of the foreigner as one carrying diseases and possible source of COVID-19. 38% of people that were interviewed said that foreign citizens have favored the increasing number of COVID-19 cases. There's also another figure that needs to be mentioned right now. According to the people that have been interviewed, the sectors where foreign citizens or migrants gave a contribution during the health emergency is the agricultural sector. Well, even if actually the reality shows that foreign citizens have contributed widely in the health sector, in the caretaking sector, or in logistics, and also distribution of food, so food delivery. So these are just a couple of examples that show you that it is very important for the cities. And as everybody said, the cities are very close to the immediate needs of the people. So for the cities, it is very important to protect their citizens. And at the moment, we have to join the principle of freedom with the principle of responsibility and solidarity. While we're waiting for science and medicine to find the vaccine to counter the health effects of the pandemic, well, I think that events like today's conference, based on knowledge, on the culture, on human rights, cooperation among cities, among municipalities, international cooperation between states and well, countries and cities. Well, these are the vaccines that we need right now, because facing prejudice, facing stereotypes, no one is immune. There's no herd immunity. And from this pandemic, no one will be saved by himself or herself, but only if we are united, we'll all be saved. So if we understand that this is the meaning of the historical challenge that we are facing, then we will have the opportunity to rethink about what we want to do, not just as cities, not just as countries, but as human beings in general. So if we face with courage, great courage this challenge, well, I think that we will manage to fight against the pandemic, not just from the health point of view, but also from the social point of view, since at the moment discrimination and racism are increasing, are getting worse in our society and in our economic fabric. Well, thank you. And now just one word from Benedetto Zacchiroli. Well, yes, as president of Eccar, I just wanted to highlight at the end of this first day of our conference, I'd just like to highlight a few things. First, which may sound very Italian, but well, we talked about this with Daniel from Heidelberg during a phone chat, and we talked about the issue of language and the words that we use. For us Italians, you know, there are now some words that carry a certain meaning when we use them. And well, I'd like to highlight that when Mayor Conti spoke, she never used the word migrant, never, never. Well, she spoke in a very natural way, and I know Isabella very well. I know that she's a very spontaneous, very natural person. She always talked about people coming from far away. And I know that when she talks about these issues with her citizens, especially with those who have difficulties dealing with these topics, she always uses this expression. And this is a very sweet, a very feminine, sweet expression by a person who takes care of the others, just like, well, all local administrators should do. Tomorrow, during our work groups, we will talk about narration, we will talk about migration, we will talk about welcoming people. And well, you know, here at Eccar, we have politicians, we have administrators, we also have some well, officers from some institutions. Well, I'd like to invite everybody to pay attention to the language that we use when we talk to the citizens. Sometimes it takes very little, just well, a little detail to help people understand things. It's very interesting because it really changes everything. Our approach to the topic really changes if we pay attention to this. And also, last but not least, I'd like to thank everybody, the Vice Mayor Sarajevo, the councillors, the mayors, all the people who have spoken today, everybody, all the listeners, or the viewers, listeners, we can't say we're all going to have dinner together after the conference. Anyhow, Bologna is a welcoming city, so you're always welcome to Bologna anytime. Obviously, well, after the pandemic, we'll wait for all of you in Bologna. This is all from me. Thank you. Thank you. Well, as a citizen of Bologna, well, I agree with your words, and Vice Mayor Trivic, Mayor, all the mayors, councillors, thank you for being with us. Tomorrow we will have the second day of this conference. We will have lots of interesting things, roundtables, etc. And thanks everybody. Thanks also to our technicians. I know it's not easy, so thank you, Lucia Fresa, the heart of this conference. See you tomorrow.